unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty. 61 days to go until the election, and we are now in what political types refer to as the actual race, where American voters finally start paying attention. Joining us today to talk about all this and to start handicapping things are Trey Traynor and Jim Ellis, regular political experts. I'm Gary Michael Voris, coming to you from Houston, Texas. All right, gents, it's safe to say, isn't it, that we are now in the beginning of the fourth quarter. The other team switched quarterbacks at halftime, came back and tied the score in the third quarter, maybe even got a teeny bit ahead. Jim, what do you think of that analogy?
Yeah, they may have kicked a field goal right before halftime and gotten ahead. But as we've said on the show before, let's not really pay attention to the ebbs and flows of this until after Labor Day. Well, now it's after Labor Day. And now I think we're looking at the race to begin to gel. And it's gelling in a very tight finish, as we all knew would happen. I think Trump is on the upswing a little bit. I think the numbers in Pennsylvania look good for him. Wisconsin, you know, he underpolls there, and all Republicans do, and he's right even with her. So that's actually a real positive for him. And the state I'm actually concerned about for Trump on the numbers, because their polling history has been very accurate, is Georgia, which I would argue is his most important state. He has to win there. And if he doesn't, he's probably going to lose the election. And right now, I think she's a tick ahead of him there.
All right. And before we ask Trey to chime in, well, he is on the Federal Election Commission. I always like to say this in a little declarative disclosure. He's on the Federal Election Commission. He's here on this show in his capacity as a private citizen exercising his still existing First Amendment rights to free speech. All right, Trey, your thoughts on where the race is right now?
Well, I agree with Jim that Georgia is a problem, although I think some of the elements in Georgia are going to be solved with Governor Kemp getting heavily involved in what's going on with the Trump campaign in Georgia. So I think we'll start to see that. The interesting shift that I have seen of late is the tightening of the U.S. Senate race in Pennsylvania, showing that is now neck and neck. And that really, that is a bellwether for whether or not President Trump is going to edge out Kamala Harris in the state of Pennsylvania. And with Georgia and Pennsylvania, I think this race is over with those two. I mean, everything else becomes somewhat irrelevant after you get those two large chunks of electoral college votes in.
Yeah, I'd like to hit for a moment, gents, if I can, on the topic of polling, so-called averages. And not all averages are created the same, are they, Jim? There's different ways that guys like you approach these things. And here's an average, here's a type of average. Give us a little layman's explanation of all that.
You know, the polling average has no statistical basis, but it helps the media tell the story, and that's why they do it. Because it's easy for people to understand. You really can't average polls because the methodologies are different. And it's like apples. You have to have apples to apples to really get a proper way to look at it. The way I look at it is the advantage we have now in politics is there's so many polls, and you can look at them all and understand that they're all not accurate to the nth degree. But if they're all basically trending in the same way, that tells you something, and that proves to be accurate. And right now, I think there's no doubt that Trump is definitely on the ascension. And if it means that he goes over the top, maybe he does if the election were today. But again, we still do have 60 days. A lot's going to happen. But Trump is in better position than he was a couple of weeks ago, which we figured would happen. And
why is that, Jim?
Normalized post-Labor Day.
Why is that?
Well, because
why is he in a better
everything was
position all of
going.
a sudden?
I mean, the hype on Harris was just immense all at once because they forcibly removed Biden from the ticket. And then the whole left-wing PR gamut to make her bigger than life, really, was successful to a degree. And then they had the convention right after that. So they really had a good solid 2 weeks of nothing but positive happenings for them, or what looked to be positive. But now it's beginning to gel and come back to where people typically are, as we expected after Labor Day, once we got through what we were calling the Kamala Harris sugar high in polling.
Yeah, exactly. Trey, let me ask you about President Trump's town hall last night in Pennsylvania. It was on Hannity. He said some key things in there, didn't he?
Well, I think one of the key things that he said is, I mean, look, the great thing is there was supposed to be a debate that happened last night, and Kamala Harris backed out of the debate. So Fox News was set with having to put on some programming. And so they do a town hall with former President Trump. Sean Hannity, I think, actually lost a little bit of control over what was going on with the audience because it was so raucous in support of President Trump last night. And I think what they're going to end up doing is making that into two shows, because I don't think they got to one audience question at all. But at the end of the night, the big takeaway from there was President Trump laying out the fact that if voters in Pennsylvania are actually concerned about the economy, they have no choice but to vote for him. They cannot take Kamala Harris at her word, whatever that may be, whatever position she has. She's either for fracking, against fracking. She's going to fix the economy. She's not going to fix the economy, whatever it might be. He said, look, you can't take those kind of chances. The economy is so bad in a state like Pennsylvania, and frankly across the country, that you cannot risk it. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, he was saying, whether you like me or not, you have to support me. And I think that's a critical message that's starting to bleed in. And I think that leads to what Jim was saying of why people have come down off of the media imposed high of the Kamala Harris announcement. They're now seeing that they actually have to focus on pocketbook issues of the economy, of illegal immigration, of wars around the world right now. And those issues are going to drive how people are going to vote. The emotions are great and they get people all excited. But at the end of the day, I still believe in the American voter to look to their own pocketbook first and foremost.
Yeah, I get to agree that I think it's, I think Trump leans to lean into and publicly embrace this idea that, hey, I suck and I'm mean and and I'm gruff and all that stuff. I mean, if he was to say, who cares if you like me or not? What you should care about is, is your life better? Why do you care what my personality's like? I just think
Gary,
a statement like that, do you want 3.5% inflation or 1.5% inflation? We're going to pay $1.79 for gas or $3.40 for gas. I mean, if he just were to say that, I think we're going after the people in the middle here in all of these in the debate coming up next week and all the campaign ads and stuff. Who cares if you like me? Who cares if you don't like my personality? What matters is that you're better off. Anyway.
Well, Gary,
go ahead.
Gary, I think you're absolutely right that he needs to lean into that. I mean, there was a big announcement yesterday. There was a big announcement yesterday from Molson Coors, who said, that they're doing away with all of their DEI efforts and that basically scrapping all of that. Trump said last night in the town hall, he said, we're done with time for political correctness. We don't have time for it. He was talking in the context of Vice President Harris not being willing to say, radical Islamic terrorists and not talk about them in those terms, at the same time that Americans are being shot as hostages at point blank range in the back of the head, and nobody in the White House saying anything about it. I mean, he's saying we don't have time anymore for all of these little niceties. It's time to get real about the economy. It's time to get real about what's going on around the world. And we've got to discard all of that. And in a better time, maybe we can focus on those things. But right now, we don't have time for that.
Yeah, Jim, your thoughts on that?
I think Trey, Trey made a good point about that, and I think President Trump is actually on a pretty good avenue as the way to explain what's happening with Kamala Harris. She's on both sides of every issue right now.
Yeah,
and but the way he handled it is saying, it doesn't matter. Can't take a chance. We know where Kamala Harris is. You look at her 20-year career in politics. She's on the extreme left. All of these changes in position on fracking, on Israel, on the Biden cover-up, for example, we can't forget that. And I think the Republicans are, to a degree. They need to get back to that. And that applies to every House and Senate race as well. Every incumbent in Washington on the Democratic side covered up Joe Biden's condition, and they need to pay for that, and they need to be held accountable. But I'm not seeing that. And, all these issues that she's changed her position, I think Trump's way of handling that is quite good. You can't take a chance. We don't know where she really is now.
Yeah. You want to wipe out
we know the Biden record.
industry
in
Pennsylvania?
Yeah. I mean, we know the Biden-Harris record. We know that. That's one thing that we know, and it's bad.
It's just one of these things, again, the idea that if you are if my life is going well, I'm talking in terms of material and financial things, why do I care if a billionaire is making an extra $1 billion? I'm not going to be a billionaire. So why do I care? Do I have, leisure money? Do I have nice vacations? Do I have have I been able to do improvements on my house? Why do I care if the billionaire, 700 miles away is buying another, 3 yachts and 6 planes? I don't understand that thing. I'm casting my vote for what gives me the best opportunities for me, not like, I'm going to make sure that billionaire only has to pay a 700% tax. It's crazy. John, I also want to switch over to something else, a big concern in the back of many people's minds. We can talk about these polls and all this and national mood and everything else, but a lot of the good guys are really concerned about the steal factor. The vast majority of Republican voters, multiple polls, ever since 2020, believe that 2020 was stolen. Whether it was or not, it's not a question for here. But the point is, that's what they believe. Mail-in votes, not taking RFK off the ballot in various states, computer manipulation, stuffing ballot boxes, early voting, ballot harvesting, no voter ID, illegals voting. Every single one of those issues tips in favor of the Democrats. And with the margins that we're talking about, any one of them could spell the difference. Trey, again, you're not answering this question in terms of the Federal Election Commission, but you're still an American citizen with an opinion. What's your opinion?
Well, so I'll start with what we began with here, talking about the polling. I mean, I think that the polling is actually part of that scheme to help manipulate what goes on voting wise. I think that this high that we had for Kamala Harris generates support for her, and then I think they turn around and show that it shifts to Trump, and they now want to start. People will start talking about whether or not there's going to be another red wave this cycle, and it does nothing but suppress a certain segment of the population from going to vote because they think it's being taken. They're going to take it for granted that a certain candidate is going to win based upon what polling numbers are showing. So I think that's a use of the numbers to manipulate it. I think that the elimination of everybody voting on the same day, voting on paper ballots and hand counting ballots has completely and totally made the entire electoral process fraught for all sorts of theft and shenanigans to take place. I mean, without all of those elements, without voter ID being in place, on top of those elements, you're going to have the ability to steal. And look, the fact of the matter is that the laws around the country have been manipulated in such a way, whether they've been done so through state legislatures, which is the right way to do it, or whether they've been done through the lawfare that the left has engaged in to adjust what the voting laws are. Either way, we now really have nowhere near the type of electoral system that we used to have in the 90s and back in the 80s, where we had some confidence in what was going on in the electoral process.
Yeah, Jim, I got a question on that too. I mean, this boils down to really a trust question. I mean, where are you as a country when you can't trust? I mean, for the record, I don't trust the elections, not with all of those things I just listed and then what, doubling down on what Trey said. You can't trust it. I mean, we sit around waiting for days for results to come in from a state. When I was a kid, when I was in my early news career, my 20s and 30s, we knew who the president was who won the election, with the exception of 2000. We knew who the president was before we went to bed. I mean, granted, it was sometimes a late night, but all of this 3, 4, 5 days later. I mean, the election in 2020 was on Tuesday, and we didn't have a winner, and I'll put that in huge quotes, a winner announced until Saturday. This just seems like a complete and total ripoff that you can't trust. What does that cause in the electorate, and what does that cause in those 10 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day?
Well, I would expect this election to go even further in what I would call political overtime, because we have more states now that take a lot longer to get these ballots done. I mean, California now is like 6 weeks before we get final numbers. That's going to affect the U.S. House majority.
Sure.
With the seats they've got out there that are in play, there are 6 seats out there that could go either way. And that's going to be maybe the difference in the House majority. It's going to come down to, I think, 1 or 2 seats. But other states are starting to do that too. Now, California says the reason it takes so long is because they verify every signature, and we'll give credit for that. But when you have 10 million votes,
well, what did they used to do? Well, what did they do in the 80s? What did they do in the 90s? I mean, I voted in California.
Well, let's
it didn't take weeks to find out my signature to get verified.
Let's bring it to current day.
Sure.
In the elections we saw in France, they had everything done that night.
Right.
Right. If they can do it and the British can do it, why can't we now still do that? It's absurd that we're going on weeks after the election and still don't have results in some of these close races. And we're going to see that a lot. And it's going to be worse this year than ever before.
Well,
and then the whole controversy is, do you count these ballots that come in after the election? Yep. Oh, they're postmarked by election day. That's another thing to deal with. And the other thing is, the election officials, the average people in these counties that are counting the ballots, this is way beyond anything they do.
Right.
Because they've really baked these sorts of things into the law, as you guys are talking about.
Right.
And then therefore, really, if you will, in a lot of instances, they've kind of legalized the fraud, certainly when it comes to non-citizens voting. I don't think there's any doubt that if only citizens voted in this election, President Trump would win. But there is a big question if it's an international election, which is what we're probably looking at.
Yeah. Trey, again, not answering for the Federal Election Commission, but you are a wealth of knowledge with regard to that. So as a private citizen, but based on your knowledge and things, I mean, where are we as a country if approximately half of the country simply cannot trust the outcome of the election?
Well, what's funny, Gary, is that about half of the country didn't trust the election, and probably the most contentious election that this country ever had in 1860 that ultimately elected Abraham Lincoln. And yet when Abraham Lincoln went to bed that night, he knew that he had been elected president of the United States. Right. And there were some states where he didn't even appear on the ballot, and yet he knew that, including the state of California. And no telephones. I mean, telegraph was the only thing that they had. And yet we were able to determine the outcome of the election that night. And he knew the next day that he was planning a trip to Washington, D.C.
All right.
So I think we are in dire straits for the republic, that we cannot trust the outcome of these elections. And I think that this election is going to be a watershed event with regard to that. If we end up having the same type of problems that we had in 2020, this election cycle, I really do think that there is going to be mass chaos in the country, because people are just not going to, they understand at once, okay, there were some mistakes made, we need to make some changes, some things like that. They can understand it. If it happens twice, it's clear that the country has been taken over by someone other than the people who should be electing these individuals.
Yeah, Jim,
that will be particularly true if Trump is ahead in all of that process.
Right.
Then we'll really see it come unraveled, because the left will go out of their minds and do whatever they have to do to change the system, because the left does one of two things. Either they win, or if they don't, they change the rules.
Right.
And that's what we've seen. The Kennedy situation is a perfect example of that.
Right.
Where he decides he's coming off the ballot. It's rather odd what he did. Well, I'm coming off the ballot in these states, but not others. He should have just gotten out totally. I think that would have strengthened his argument. But then these states where they think it's advantageous to the Democrats, like North Carolina, to have him on the ballot, you've got a very partisan board of elections there that argued, no, you can't come off the ballot. We're keeping you on the ballot, even though his desire is, as the candidate, to come off. So it all depends on these various state laws. Trey knows very well that Texas has a very strong state law on the ballot. Once you're on the ballot, you're on the ballot.
Right.
But these other states like that still can manipulate, most of them are doing it well. What's going to help Harris more? Does it help Harris more to have Kennedy on the ballot or not? Most people think, well, he endorsed Trump now, so it actually helps him to have have Kennedy off the ballot. If that's the case, however, then why were the Democrats suing in many states to get Kennedy off the ballot?
Right.
Because obviously in those places like Nevada, for example, where they have an active lawsuit to get him off the ballot, they don't think Kennedy's presence on the ballot helps Kamala Harris. So you have state Democratic parties suing in these states to get Kennedy off the ballot. So it's not a slam dunk that Kennedy being on or off the ballot helps one candidate or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think even your enemy can be wrong. I mean, I think one of the things you do when you're sort of looking at the other guy, you sort of assume every move the other side makes is correct and crafty and all of that. And, oftentimes that is the case. That's why they're your opponent. But not every single thought and idle, machination they have is necessarily correct. They could just flat be wrong. And here you've got different state parties, trying to sue to keep him on, sue to keep him off. And, maybe locally it makes sense what they're doing. Nationally, maybe not so much. I mean, who knows? Guys, I'm a really big picture guy. And I just would like your reactions to this. My gut instinct is that this election, the outcome, becomes a dividing point where we just, now I don't know what it looks like, but philosophically, so many Americans, tens and tens and tens of millions of Americans, simply give up on the idea of the United States of America. We aren't united. Texas has as much in common with New York as, the North and South Pole have with each other. And these aren't reconcilable. They really aren't. I don't want to talk about a national divorce or whatever. I have no idea how this would happen, but I mean, these are two different countries. They're two different countries. And I don't think one half of the country is going to want to be sitting ruled by the other half of the country. Your thoughts, Jim?
No matter what happens, I think we'll be in that situation because it is going to be close. And people talk about, well, the country's so politically polarized, and that's true. But the reason that makes it so contentious is that both sides have about half.
Right.
And not only is it polarized, but the sides are about equal in size. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I think we could see some things. I don't think that would necessarily be too bad if we separated into two countries because we would win.
Yeah. No, we got the guns.
I'm not sure why that's such a bad solution. I mean, everybody can get what they want.
Yeah. Trey, I know you're talking again. Federal Election Commission is not talking right here. You are, but you and I are both in Texas. You're in Austin. I'm in Houston. This just doesn't feel like it's going to go down well.
Well, it doesn't feel like it's going to go down well. But look, the greatness of America is that the process itself works when the process is given the opportunity to work. I think that this is absolutely a test for our republic as to whether or not it will stand. I think if there is a fair process, if everyone sees a fair process, that everyone will in fact accept the outcome. But that's the key, is that there has to be a fair, meaningful process. As a lawyer, I talk a lot of times about procedure being more important than the substance. And here, this election, the procedure of this election is more important in some circumstances than the substance. Everyone has to see a fair process. And that means that people have got to get out. People have got to get out of the pews. They've got to go to the polling locations, and they've got to be involved. They've got to be involved as a poll watcher. They've got to volunteer for their campaigns. They've got to act with these candidates. They've got to support the people that they support on both sides of the aisle. But they have to have a fair process.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who doubt that's even possible anymore. But before we leave, guys, closing thoughts. Jim Ellis, where's the race right now? Who wins?
Today, Trump's got a real good chance to win today. But as I've said repeatedly over the course of this whole year and election cycle, it's not today. And it still isn't today. But we're getting close because remember, everybody, we no longer have election day. We have election month. North Carolina is the first state to mail out absentee ballots. That goes out on Friday. And by middle of October, we'll see real voting. So from October to November 5th, that's when the rubber meets the road. So it's now election month, and we're just about there. No longer election day.
Yeah, even that seems completely crooked as hell. Trey, your closing thoughts.
Well, so for me, I think if it happens today, that Trump becomes president. But I think it's because of the genius of the American Constitution and because of the Electoral College that happens. And I think that's the one safety net of the big divide, the 50-50 polarization of the country. The saving grace is that the Electoral College exists, and there's still some role for the states and the state legislatures to play in the governance of the country.
All right. Squeaker, It's going to be a squeaker. Thanks, man, for coming on. Awesome, smart, great insights as always. If you like what you hear and you're sitting at home watching this and going, wow, I don't really hear all this, please contribute to Souls and Liberty. You can be a monthly donor, one-time donor, a foundation, a founding donor, whatever it is. Nobody brings you the discussions that we bring you like this. So please click on that button and support us. Democrats are always carrying on with black voters, saying blacks should vote for them because of how much better their lives are when Democrats are in control. Well, indeed, it is shaping up to be a hallmark of an increasingly concerned Harris campaign, as multiple studies show a slipping away of black voters as more and more wake up to the lie, the communist lie. For example, since the historic Civil Rights Act passed in 1964, there have been 31 Congresses, meaning 2-year periods. On only 9 occasions has one party controlled both chambers, the Senate and the House, and the U.S. presidency at the same time. 7 out of 9 of those times, it was Democrats who controlled both chambers of Congress and the White House. And yet, over those 7 out of 9 times, black poverty, unemployment, earnings, and wealth stayed in the toilet with very little change. On only 2 occasions out of the 9 did Republicans control Capitol Hill and the White House. One of those was Donald Trump's first term from 2016 to 2018, and only then was there a dramatic drop across the board in all of those bad numbers for blacks. Unemployment, wealth, etc., they all got better. Those numbers improved for black voters when Trump was president and Republicans controlled both the Senate and the House. There were very modest improvements, very small here and there since 1964 for blacks economically, but nothing like what happened when Trump got in. And when Obama was in the White House and Dems controlled both chambers of Congress his first 2 years, poverty rates for blacks actually increased from 2008 to 2010. Only under Trump did these numbers begin to improve substantially for blacks. So, why do black voters keep voting for Democrats? In short, because Democrats are great liars. We mean really, really good liars. You'd have to be a spectacular liar to get people to keep voting for you when your policies make them more poor and more disadvantaged. Democrats need supermajorities of blacks to vote for them to stay in power. They are the single most loyal group of Democratic voters, but there may be trouble brewing in paradise, and growing numbers of blacks are waking up to these Democratic lies. But one lie never talked about in the media is why Democrats want that power. It's not to help blacks, clearly. It's to kill them. It's a political genocide, using laws and policies to get rid of an entire ethnicity, in this case blacks, African Americans. A third are wiped out by abortion before they ever see the light of day. And enormous numbers die on their streets in black-on-black crime thanks to the poverty Democrats keep them in. It's heinous, it's evil, it's wicked. But then again, Democrats hate God, they hate children, they hate America. It's just no one ever stopped before to add blacks to that list. Democrats hate blacks. Communist Democrats have the devil as their father, so what else would you expect? God love you. I'm Gary Michael Voris.